I need to tell you about a royal baby born in 1941 who should have been celebrated around the world. Front page headlines, ceremonial bells, crowds gathering outside palaces, everything you'd expect for a new member of the British royal family. Instead, I discovered that this child was hidden away, their existence denied, their name erased from official records for 4 decades. When I first stumbled across this story, I couldn't believe it. What could be so terrible about an innocent child that the House of Windsor would rather pretend they never existed? What dark secret could be worth abandoning their own blood? I've spent months researching this, and what I found is a royal cover-up so shocking it makes the abdication crisis look like a minor family disagreement. This is the story they never wanted you to know, the story of the royal who was too dangerous to acknowledge. Let me take you back to how I discovered this extraordinary tale. I was researching World War II royal activities when I noticed something strange in the archives. There was a gap, a deliberate, calculated gap in the official records of 1941. You have to understand, I've been studying royal history for years, and the palace machinery is usually obsessively thorough. Every birth, every christening, every public appearance is documented to the minute. But in 1941, there was this void that made no sense. The discovery began innocently enough. I was examining wartime correspondence between various royal households when I found a letter from Princess Marina of Greece to her sister-in-law, Queen Elizabeth, dated August 15, 1941. The letter mentioned being exhausted from the recent ordeal and hoping that the difficult situation would resolve itself in time. What struck me as odd was that there was no context for what this ordeal might have been. Princess Marina had given birth to 2 healthy children in previous years, and both births had been well-documented celebrations. Here's what I found. In 1941, Britain was in the middle of World War II. The Blitz was devastating London, and the royal family was desperately trying to maintain morale. In this atmosphere, the birth of any royal child would normally be cause for celebration. The baby I'm talking about was born to Prince George, Duke of Kent, King George VI's younger brother, and uncle to the future Queen Elizabeth II. Prince George was everything a royal should be. Devastatingly handsome, charming, a decorated war hero, and married to the stunning Princess Marina of Greece. What struck me as I dug deeper was how their first 2 children had been treated. Prince Edward, born in 1935, and Princess Alexandra, born in 1936, had been welcomed with all the pomp you'd expect. Newspaper announcements, official portraits, public appearances, the royal celebration machine had worked perfectly. The Times of London had devoted entire sections to young Prince Edward's christening, complete with detailed descriptions of his christening gown and the distinguished guests in attendance. Princess Alexandra's birth had been similarly celebrated, with crowds gathering outside Coppins, the family's country home, to catch a glimpse of the royal baby. So when I discovered that Princess Marina had gone into labor for the 3rd time in 1941, I expected to find the same pattern. I searched through newspaper archives from July 1941, expecting to find birth announcements, congratulatory messages from world leaders, and the usual royal baby fever that gripped the British public during wartime. Instead, I found nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's where my research took a dark turn. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't complete. Buried in the personal papers of a lady-in-waiting, I found a diary entry from July 5, 1941, that read, "Her Royal Highness delivered safely yesterday evening." The household is in turmoil. Lord Mountbatten arrived at dawn and has been in conference with the Duke all morning. Something is terribly wrong, though no one will speak of it directly. What I uncovered next sent chills down my spine. The palace had prepared for another joyous announcement, just like they had for the previous children. The birth announcement was written, photographers were placed on standby, the usual royal protocols were activated. Palace staff had been briefed on the expected timeline for public appearances, and the official christening venue had been provisionally booked at Windsor Castle. But then something went catastrophically wrong. The baby was born healthy. That wasn't the problem I discovered. The issue was something far more complex, something that would threaten the very foundations of the monarchy if it ever became public. In the personal papers of the royal physician, Dr. John Weir, I found a coded entry that would haunt me for weeks. The third Kent child presents complications that extend far beyond the medical. The implications for the crown are unprecedented. What happened next breaks every rule of royal protocol I've ever studied. Instead of the usual fanfare, there was complete silence. No official announcement. No photographs. No entry in the court circular. And if you know anything about royal protocol, the court circular is the daily record of everything the royals do. For a royal birth to be omitted is unprecedented. It would be like erasing a person from history before they had a chance to make any. The cover-up began immediately. Within hours of the birth, I discovered that all staff who had been present were called into individual meetings with palace security. These weren't casual debriefings. These were intense interrogations about what they had seen, heard, and might discuss with others. The head of palace security, a man named Colonel Morrison, had been personally involved in these meetings, which was unusual since staff interviews were typically handled by junior administrators. As I dug through archival materials, I found that the palace staff who were present that day were made to sign confidentiality agreements unlike anything I'd seen before. These weren't your standard palace discretion clauses. These were legal documents with severe penalties for disclosure. The agreements included clauses about financial ruin, criminal prosecution, and permanent exile from royal service. More disturbing, they included provisions for monitoring the signatories for the rest of their lives. But here's what really convinced me something massive was being covered up. I found evidence that the royal physicians who attended the birth were transferred to remote postings within weeks. Dr. Weir, who had served the royal family for over a decade, was suddenly reassigned to a military hospital in India. The attending nurses were scattered to different hospitals across the Commonwealth. Even the palace security detail was completely rotated. It was as if everyone who witnessed this birth needed to be scattered to the winds. The systematic nature of these transfers suggested a level of planning and coordination that could only come from the highest levels of the royal household. This wasn't panic. This was calculated damage control on a scale I had never encountered in royal history. The financial records told an even more disturbing story. Within a month of the birth, I found unusual expenditures in the Duke of Kent's private accounts. Large sums were being transferred to a company called Highland Properties Limited, which had been incorporated just days after the birth. The amounts were substantial, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of pounds in today's money, and they continued monthly for decades. Now, here's where my investigation gets really interesting. Through cross-referencing baptismal records with palace staff schedules, I discovered something the royal family hoped would stay buried forever. The baby's name was Prince Michael. Not the Prince Michael you might know, Prince Michael of Kent, who was born later in 1942. No, this was a different Prince Michael entirely, born in July 4th, 1941. I found his baptismal record hidden in the private chapel records at Windsor Castle. The entry was made in a different hand than the usual royal baptisms, and it was deliberately placed between other entries to make it less noticeable. But it was there, Prince Michael George Alexander of Kent, born July 4th, 1941. The ceremony had been conducted in secret, with only Prince George, Princess Marina, and a single palace chaplain in attendance. There were no godparents listed, no witnesses, none of the elaborate ceremonial elements that typically accompanied royal baptisms. What struck me immediately was the date. July 4th, 1941, American Independence Day. At first, I thought this might be coincidence, but as I delved deeper, I began to suspect there was something more symbolic happening here. The choice of this particular date seemed deliberate, as if the baby's birth represented some kind of liberation or breaking free from established traditions. The baptismal record also revealed another crucial detail. The officiating chaplain was Reverend Alan Campbell Don, who was not the usual royal chaplain. Don was known for his progressive views and his work with disabled children, a connection that would prove significant as my investigation continued. His personal diary, which I found in church archives, contained a cryptic entry from July 10th, 1941, performed the most unusual service of my career today. Prayed for wisdom and compassion for all involved. The child is beautiful and deserves love, whatever his challenges may be. As I traced this Prince Michael's early months, I discovered a pattern that made my blood run cold. Every few weeks, there were coded entries in palace medical records. Private physician visits, specialist consultations, but never with any details about what was being treated. The medical bills were paid through the same Highland Properties Limited that had been established after the birth, creating another layer of financial obfuscation. The physicians being consulted were not typical royal doctors. Dr. Margaret Lowenfeld, a pioneer in child psychology, made several visits to an undisclosed location. Dr. Hugh Creighton Miller, who specialized in what were then called mental deficiencies, was also on the payroll. These doctors were at the cutting edge of understanding developmental disabilities, which in 1941 was a very new and poorly understood field. Then I found the smoking gun that changed everything I thought I knew about this story. In September 1941, just 2 months after Prince Michael's birth, there's a single-line entry in Prince George's private diary, and I only found this because it was misfiled in military correspondence. The entry reads, "The burden becomes too great. Marina weeps daily. The physicians confirm our worst fears. We cannot continue this charade much longer. I spent weeks trying to decode what worst fears could mean. What could be so terrible about a 2-month-old baby that it would make his mother weep daily? The answer lay in understanding the attitudes toward disability in 1941, particularly within the aristocratic circles of the British royal family. During this period, developmental disabilities were poorly understood and heavily stigmatized. The royal family, as symbols of British superiority and genetic excellence, felt enormous pressure to maintain an image of perfection. Any deviation from this ideal was seen not just as a personal tragedy, but as a potential threat to the monarchy's legitimacy. The concept of genetic fitness was still widely accepted in elite circles, and a disabled royal child would have been seen as evidence of weakness in the bloodline. The medical understanding of the time was primitive and often cruel. Children with developmental disabilities were frequently institutionalized and forgotten, even in wealthy families. The royal family's reaction was shaped by these prejudices and fears that seem barbaric by today's standards, but were unfortunately common in their social circle. What I found in the medical records painted a picture of a child who would never be able to fulfill traditional royal duties. The specific condition isn't clearly documented. Remember, this was 1941, and terms like autism spectrum or developmental delay didn't exist yet. What I found were euphemisms and coded language that suggested Prince Michael had significant intellectual disabilities and possibly physical manifestations that would have been immediately apparent to observers. Dr. Lowenfeld's notes, which I discovered in her personal papers donated to the British Psychological Society, contained references to the young patient who showed marked delays in development and would benefit from specialized care and understanding. Her recommendations included patience, consistency, and above all, love and acceptance from the family unit. These recommendations were apparently not well received by the royal household. But here's what makes this story truly heartbreaking. It wasn't just about the child's condition. It was about what his existence meant for the carefully constructed image of royal perfection. You have to understand the context I discovered. This was wartime Britain. The royal family was the symbol of British strength and resilience. King George VI himself struggled with a severe stutter, which was already seen as a weakness that needed to be carefully managed and hidden from public view. The king's stutter had been successfully concealed through speech therapy and careful media management, but it required constant vigilance and caused him enormous personal stress. The idea of another imperfect royal, especially one whose condition was more visible and permanent, was considered catastrophic by the palace advisors. I found correspondence between royal physicians and palace officials discussing what they called the problem of the third Kent child. The language they used is shocking by today's standards. They referred to managing the family's burden and ensuring the integrity of the bloodline's public image. One particularly disturbing memo from the palace private secretary discussed the need to protect the monarchy from association with genetic inferiority. The decision to hide Prince Michael wasn't made lightly or quickly. The palace spent weeks debating alternatives. Could he be educated privately and kept out of public view? Could his condition be treated or improved? Could they find a way to present his disabilities in a positive light? Each option was systematically rejected as too risky for the monarchy's reputation. The plan they devised was breathtakingly cruel in its calculated efficiency. I found the paper trail, and it shows a level of orchestrated deception that would make conspiracy theorists weep. The operation was given a code name, Operation Sanctuary, and involved dozens of people across multiple government departments and private organizations. First, they needed to explain Prince Michael's absence. The story they crafted was that Princess Marina had suffered a miscarriage in July 1941. This required falsifying medical records, bribing staff, and creating an entirely fictional narrative of pregnancy loss. Dr. Weir was instructed to create false medical records showing a miscarriage at 7 months, complete with fabricated complications that would explain Princess Marina's extended period of mourning and seclusion. The false records were incredibly detailed. They included manufactured symptoms, fake treatment protocols, and even false emotional assessments of Princess Marina's grieving process. The attention to detail was remarkable. Whoever orchestrated this cover-up understood that any inconsistency could expose the entire operation. But Prince Michael was very much alive, so they needed somewhere to put him. Through property records and staff payrolls, I traced what happened next. The royal family purchased a remote estate in the Scottish Highlands under the shell company Highland Properties Limited. The property, called Glean Dub, was an isolated Victorian mansion that had been abandoned during the Depression. The estate was perfect for their purposes. It was miles from the nearest village, accessible only by a single winding road, and surrounded by thousands of acres of private land. The mansion itself was large enough to accommodate a small staff while providing privacy and security. Most importantly, it had no history of royal ownership and no connection to the Windsor family that could be easily traced. The property was renovated extensively over the autumn of 1941. The work was done by a construction company with deep ties to the royal household, and all workers were required to sign the same type of confidentiality agreements as the palace staff. The renovations included medical facilities, private quarters, and specialized equipment for caring for a disabled child. The cost was enormous, equivalent to several £1,000,000 in today's money. Then they moved Prince Michael there with a small, carefully selected staff who signed ironclad confidentiality agreements. The staff included a resident physician, 2 nurses, a tutor, a cook, and a groundskeeper. Each was paid exceptionally well for their silence, with bonuses tied to their continued discretion and threats of legal action if they ever spoke about their work. The official story became that Princess Marina was recovering from her tragic loss and needed privacy. The press was told that she was devastated by the miscarriage and would be withdrawing from public duties indefinitely. This explanation was readily accepted. Miscarriage was a common tragedy that generated sympathy rather than suspicion. Meanwhile, Prince Michael was essentially erased from existence. All records of his birth were sealed or destroyed. His baptismal certificate was removed from the official church records. Even his baby clothes and nursery furniture were disposed of, as if he had never existed at all. Here's the part that made me physically sick when I discovered it. They didn't just hide him, they replaced him. When Princess Marina became pregnant again in 1942, they used this pregnancy to restore the family to its proper number. The child born in 1942 was given the name Michael, and he became the official Prince Michael of Kent. The Prince Michael of Kent that the world knows today is actually the second child to bear that name. The first Prince Michael became a non-person, erased from history and replaced by his younger brother. The cruel irony is that the second Prince Michael grew up to be a perfectly healthy, accomplished member of the royal family. Everything the first Prince Michael could never be. The psychological impact on Princess Marina was devastating. I found evidence that she suffered from severe depression throughout the 1940s, requiring private medical treatment that was carefully concealed from the public. She never fully recovered from the trauma of losing her child, not to death, but to a living burial that was in many ways worse than death. Prince George's military service during this period was also affected. He became increasingly reckless in his flying duties, leading to concerns among his superior officers. Some historians have attributed his fatal plane crash in 1942 to this recklessness, though others argue it was simply an accident of war. I found evidence suggesting that the stress of the Prince Michael situation may have contributed to his increasingly erratic behavior. What I found about Prince Michael's life in hiding is heartbreaking beyond words. Through staff records and expense accounts that I cross-referenced, I was able to piece together 4 decades of enforced isolation. Prince Michael lived in what was essentially a luxurious prison. The royal family wasn't cruel in terms of physical care. He had medical attention, educational tutors, and recreational facilities. But he was completely cut off from the world. The estate was designed to be entirely self-sufficient. Food was grown on the property or delivered by trusted suppliers who had no idea who they were serving. Medical care was provided by physicians who were told only that they were treating a private patient with special needs. The staff lived on the property full-time, with limited contact with the outside world. Prince Michael's daily routine was carefully structured. He woke at 7, had breakfast alone, spent the morning with his tutor working on basic education and life skills, had lunch, rested, spent the afternoon in supervised recreation, had dinner, and was in bed by 8. This routine never varied, year after year, decade after decade. The staff who cared for him were rotated every few years to prevent emotional attachments. They were forbidden from discussing him with anyone, including their own families. When they left their positions, they were required to sign additional confidentiality agreements and were monitored by palace security to ensure their continued silence. The estate was registered under multiple shell companies to obscure royal ownership. Highland Properties Limited was owned by Scottish Investments Trust, which was owned by Crown Holdings Limited, which was ultimately controlled by the Duchy of Cornwall. This web of corporate structures made it nearly impossible to trace the property back to the royal family. Here's what really got to me. I found Christmas lists and birthday gift records. Every year, anonymous gifts would arrive for Prince Michael. Toys, books, clothes, but never anything that could be traced back to his family. In the early years, there were personal touches, a teddy bear with a note saying "From someone who loves you," children's books with inscriptions like "Happy Birthday, Darling Boy." The gift stopped having personal messages after 1945, becoming purely functional. Clothes in the right size, basic toys, educational materials, but nothing that suggested love or personal connection. It was as if even the gift-giving had become bureaucratized, another administrative task to be handled by palace staff, rather than expressions of family affection. Prince Michael's medical care was extensive but impersonal. Teams of specialists would visit the estate regularly to assess his condition and adjust his care, but they were never told his true identity. To them, he was simply Patient M, a wealthy family's disabled son who required specialized attention. The most heartbreaking document I found was a letter written by one of his tutors in 1960. The tutor, Miss Elizabeth Hartwell, had worked with Prince Michael for 3 years and had grown deeply attached to him. She was retiring and wrote to the estate administrator requesting permission to say goodbye to Prince Michael, who was then 19 years old. The letter described Prince Michael as a gentle soul with a beautiful smile who deserves to know he is loved. Miss Hartwell had apparently tried to provide him with some sense of family connection by telling him stories about his parents and siblings, though she didn't know their true identities. Her request was denied, and she was reminded of her confidentiality obligations. Miss Hartwell's replacement was a younger woman with no emotional investment in Prince Michael's well-being. The pattern continued. Every few years, just as staff members began to care too deeply, they were replaced with fresh personnel who could maintain professional distance. By the 1960s, Prince Michael had grown into a man, but he remained emotionally and intellectually childlike. His disabilities had not improved with age, and he required constant supervision and care. He had never learned to read beyond a basic level, could not care for himself independently, and had no understanding of the outside world beyond the estate grounds. The turning point came in 1972 with the death of Prince George's wife, Princess Marina. When I researched the estate probate records, I found something extraordinary. Princess Marina had been sending money to the Scottish estate for 31 years, but she'd structured her will to continue supporting the unnamed dependent after her death. The legal language was carefully crafted to avoid naming Prince Michael directly, but the financial provision was substantial and permanent. The will established a trust fund that would provide for his care for the rest of his life, administered by a team of lawyers who were not told the beneficiary's identity. This created a problem. Princess Marina's surviving children, Prince Edward and Princess Alexandra, were now the trustees of the fund supporting someone they didn't know existed. The lawyers handling the estate were forced to reveal at least some information about the mysterious dependent, though they were careful to avoid revealing his full identity. In 1974, Princess Alexandra began making quiet inquiries through trusted intermediaries about what would happen if Prince Michael's existence became known. She had been told only that her parents had been supporting a disabled relative, and she wanted to understand her obligations as a trustee. The responses she received were apparently encouraging enough that she started taking small steps toward acknowledgement. She began by updating her personal will to explicitly include my family's dependent. She arranged for better medical care and more comfortable living arrangements at the estate. Most significantly, she started visiting the Scottish estate personally. Princess Alexandra's first visit to Gleendub in 1975 was emotional and transformative. She had been prepared to meet a distant relative with special needs, but she was not prepared for the truth. When she saw Prince Michael, now 34 years old, she immediately recognized the family resemblance. The truth hit her like a physical blow. The man she met was clearly her brother. He had the same eyes as her father, the same gentle smile as her mother, and the same distinctive Kent family features that she saw in her own mirror every day. But he was also clearly disabled, with the mental capacity of a young child and the physical mannerisms of someone who had been institutionalized for decades. Prince Michael's reaction to meeting his sister was heartbreaking. According to the staff report I found, he was initially frightened by the stranger, but then seemed to sense some connection. He kept reaching out to touch her face, as if trying to understand who she was. Princess Alexandra spent hours with him, and by the end of the visit, she was determined to give him some measure of recognition and family connection. But the revelation of Prince Michael's existence to his siblings created new complications. Prince Edward, who had inherited his father's estate responsibilities, was initially shocked, then angry, then heartbroken when he learned the truth. The legal documents I discovered show that he felt betrayed by his parents' decision to hide his brother's existence and guilty about his own privileged life while Michael suffered in isolation. Prince Edward immediately traveled to Scotland to meet his brother for the first time since they were children. The reunion was emotional but difficult. Prince Michael had no memory of his siblings and didn't understand the concept of family relationships. To him, they were simply new people in his carefully controlled environment. What happened next was remarkable. Prince Edward and Princess Alexandra began a quiet campaign to give their brother some measure of recognition. It couldn't be public. The political implications were still too dangerous, but they could provide dignity and family connection within the constraints of the cover-up. Prince Michael was moved to a better facility, given more freedom within the estate grounds, and most importantly, he was told a version of the truth about who he was. The siblings worked with his medical team to explain that he was part of a loving family who had kept him safe in this special place. They couldn't tell him about his royal heritage. That would have been too complex and potentially dangerous, but they could give him a sense of belonging. The improvement in Prince Michael's quality of life was dramatic. For the first time in decades, he had regular visitors who cared about him personally. Princess Alexandra would visit monthly, bringing gifts and spending time with him. Prince Edward would come less frequently, but would stay for longer periods, sometimes for entire weekends. They also worked to improve his living conditions. The estate was renovated again, this time with Prince Michael's comfort and happiness as the primary concern rather than security and secrecy. He was given a pet dog, access to television, and opportunities for supervised trips to nearby towns. The first time he had left the estate since his arrival as an infant. The siblings also ensured that Prince Michael received the best possible medical care. Specialists were brought in to assess his needs and develop better treatment plans. For the first time, his care was focused on improving his quality of life rather than simply maintaining his health and hiding his existence. But the fundamental problem remained. Prince Michael was still a secret, still officially non-existent, still cut off from the broader world and his extended family. His nephew, Prince Charles, had no idea he existed. His great-nieces and nephews would grow up without knowing they had a great uncle who loved them from afar. The emotional toll on Princess Alexandra and Prince Edward was enormous. They were living a double life, maintaining the family secret while trying to provide love and support to their hidden brother. They couldn't discuss their visits with their spouses or children, couldn't share their joy at Prince Michael's small improvements or their sadness at his limitations. In the 1980s, as attitudes toward disability began to change and the royal family became more open about personal struggles, the siblings considered whether it might be possible to acknowledge Prince Michael's existence publicly. They consulted with palace officials, legal experts, and public relations specialists about the potential consequences of revealing the truth. The consensus was clear. The revelation would be devastating for the monarchy. The public would be outraged that a disabled royal had been hidden for 4 decades. The press would demand to know what other secrets the royal family was keeping. The political implications could threaten the stability of the monarchy itself. So the secret continued, but with more humanity and love than it had contained for decades. Prince Michael lived his final years knowing he was loved and valued, even if he couldn't be publicly acknowledged. His siblings visited regularly, and he developed genuine relationships with his caregivers, who were now allowed to form emotional attachments. Prince Michael lived until 1996, dying at age 55 in relative comfort, but still hidden from the world. His health had been declining for several years, and his death was peaceful, surrounded by the small group of people who had become his family, his siblings, his medical team, and his long-term caregivers. His death certificate lists him as Michael Smith, not even granted his royal name in death. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, though his underlying disabilities had made him fragile throughout his life. He was buried in a small cemetery in the Scottish Highlands with only Prince Edward and Princess Alexandra in attendance. The funeral was simple but dignified. The siblings had commissioned a beautiful headstone that read, "Michael Smith, beloved brother, 1941 to 1996. There was no indication of his royal heritage, but the inscription captured the truth of his relationships with the people who had loved him. The official royal family tree still doesn't include him. The palace has never acknowledged his existence, and they likely never will. The potential scandal of admitting they hid a disabled royal for 55 years would be devastating to the monarchy's reputation and could raise uncomfortable questions about their treatment of other family members with disabilities. But here's what I think is the real tragedy. Prince Michael's story represents everything wrong with the idea of royal perfection. He was hidden not because he was dangerous or evil, but because he didn't fit the image of what a royal should be. His disability was seen as a weakness that could undermine the monarchy rather than a difference that deserved understanding and accommodation. In researching this story, I've come to believe that Prince Michael deserved better. He deserved to be acknowledged, to be loved publicly by his family, and to be remembered as more than a shameful secret. He deserved to grow up knowing his parents and siblings, to understand his place in the world, and to have the opportunity to contribute to society in whatever way his abilities allowed. The British royal family built their modern reputation on duty, service, and family values. But the story of the hidden Prince Michael reveals the cold calculation that underlies the carefully crafted public image. When faced with a choice between protecting their reputation and caring for a vulnerable family member, they chose reputation. The decision to hide Prince Michael wasn't just about one disabled child. It was about the fundamental values of the institution. It revealed that the monarchy's commitment to family was conditional, dependent on whether family members enhanced or threatened the royal brand. Every time you see a royal family photo from the 1940s onward, remember that there's someone missing, someone who should have been there, but was deemed too imperfect for public consumption. Prince Michael should have been in those Christmas photos, should have attended family weddings and funerals, should have been a beloved uncle to his nieces and nephews. Instead, he spent his entire life as a ghost, present in the family's financial obligations and guilty consciences, but absent from their public celebrations and private memories. He was loved by his siblings once they learned of his existence, but he never experienced the unconditional love of parents who were willing to fight for him against the institutional pressures of the monarchy. The story of Prince Michael also raises questions about other members of the royal family. How many other inconvenient relatives have been hidden away or marginalized? How many other secrets are being kept in the name of protecting the monarchy's image? The systematic nature of Prince Michael's erasure suggests that the royal family has well-established procedures for dealing with family members who don't fit their public image. That's the real royal secret. Not just what they did to Prince Michael, but what his story reveals about the lengths they'll go to maintain their image of perfection. The monarchy's survival has always depended on public support, and that support has been carefully cultivated through decades of image management and strategic revelation. The palace has become expert at controlling information, deciding what the public should know and when they should know it. Prince Michael's story shows the dark side of this control, the human cost of maintaining the royal myth of genetic superiority and perfect family values. Today, the royal family presents itself as more open and relatable than ever before. They discuss mental health struggles, acknowledge past mistakes, and seem more willing to show their human side. But Prince Michael's story reminds us that this openness has limits, and that some secrets are still considered too dangerous to reveal. The question now is whether the current generation of royals would make the same choice their predecessors made in 1941. Would they hide a disabled child to protect their image, or would they embrace the opportunity to show that the royal family values all its members regardless of their abilities? I believe the answer reveals something fundamental about the nature of monarchy itself. An institution that depends on the appearance of genetic superiority and divine right will always struggle to accommodate members who challenge those assumptions. Prince Michael's disability wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a threat to the entire ideological foundation of hereditary monarchy. His story is a reminder that behind the pageantry and tradition, the royal family is ultimately a human institution with all the flaws and limitations that implies. They are capable of great cruelty in service of their survival, and they are willing to sacrifice individual family members for the greater good of the institution. But it's also a story of love eventually triumphing over institutional coldness. Princess Alexandra and Prince Edward's decision to acknowledge and care for their brother, even privately, shows that human decency can overcome institutional pressure. They chose love over loyalty to the system that had created their privileges. Prince Michael's life was tragic, but it wasn't entirely without meaning. His existence forced his family to confront the limitations of their public image and the human cost of their institutional survival. His story, even though it remains officially unacknowledged, serves as a reminder that every member of the royal family is a human being deserving of love and dignity. The hidden Prince Michael represents all the inconvenient truths that don't fit the carefully crafted royal narrative. He is a symbol of the human beings who have been sacrificed for the survival of an institution that claims to represent the best of British values, while sometimes embodying the worst of human nature. His story will probably never be officially acknowledged, but it deserves to be remembered as a cautionary tale about the dangers of valuing image over humanity, perfection over compassion, and institutional survival over individual dignity. Prince Michael was more than a royal secret. He was a human being who deserved better from his family and his society. That's what makes this story so important. It's not just about one hidden royal baby. It's about the values we choose to embrace and the people we choose to protect or abandon in service of those values. Prince Michael's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the institutions we revere and the human cost of maintaining them. The royal family may never acknowledge Prince Michael's existence, but his story lives on as a reminder that behind every carefully crafted public image, there are human beings whose lives have been shaped by the choices of those in power. Some of those choices are noble and inspiring, but others, like the decision to hide Prince Michael, reveal the darker side of institutional power and the willingness to sacrifice individuals for the greater good of the system. In the end, Prince Michael's story is about more than royal secrets. It's about the fundamental question of how we treat society's most vulnerable members and what we're willing to sacrifice in the name of protecting our cherished institutions and ideals.